So thanks very much. So it's my turn at the podium. I'll be talking about thermoregulation, environmental conditions, and performance in ultramarathons. A lot of exciting times in the marathon world with attempts to break the 2-hour barrier. And a lot of different factors have been considered here: shoes, nutrition, biomechanics, aerobic capacity, lactate threshold, and even environment, temperature of the track, temperature of the environment. A lot of these have been eliminated, but it's pretty clear that there's only one that really matters, as you can probably guess from the name of my lab, and that's the environment. So today I'm going to talk about endurance performance, mountain ultramarathon performance, and we're going to look at temperature and humidity, how that influences performance. So some of the earlier research looking at this topic here, this is winning time in minutes as a function of ambient temperature, and it can be seen that for a marathon, a temperature somewhere around 10 or 15 degrees, or a little bit lower than 15 is potentially an optimal temperature for performance. But as thermophysiologists, we know that indeed humidity is extremely important, as well as temperature, and so the temperature alone is not enough. So flatter courses as well, when we're looking at the marathon races, are different than the mountain ultramarathons, and we don't have the large variations in temperatures as we see as we're going up into the mountains on a flat marathon course. And as I mentioned, humidity and sweating, and what about aerobic fitness? So when you go beyond the distance of a marathon into the mountains, Dr. Hofer and Wegelin in this study here looked at the finishing time across gender for as a function of minimum air temperature for the females and the males. Females finish slower than the males across all temperatures, but we could see that for this very large sample of runners from the Western States 100 of over 5,000, as the temperature went up, the finishing times were slower. But indeed, humidity and sweating, and what about aerobic fitness in these individuals? In the same study, they looked at here probability of finishing, and again here about 4,000 runners over 1986 to 2007, as was the case in the last slide. Probability of finishing as a function of age and gender, as well as temperature. So minimum temperature of 11, a mean of 16 and 22. The males always had a higher probability of finishing than the females. That declined as they got older, and the finishing time, the probability of finishing as the temperature went up from 11 to 16 to 22 went down for both males and females. I believe the paper shows that below 38 years of age there wasn't a significant difference, but it was evident at the older ages. So again, my question is humidity and sweating and aerobic fitness in these individuals. And again, this is a study with an enormously big contribution to the field. But as a thermophysiologist, I'm thinking about humidity and sweating and thermoregulation, as well as aerobic fitness. So several of the studies have gone ahead and, as Dr. Chung so elegantly pointed out this morning, looked at temperature and humidity and the wet bulb globe temperature. In the olden days, you could get a natural wet bulb temperature, a dry bulb temperature with a globe temperature, and from that come up with your wet bulb globe temperature. Now we use a little monitor that is linked to your phone by Bluetooth, and things are considerably easier, although you sure don't want to lose your equipment because it's expensive. So studies that have gone ahead and looked at both temperature and humidity using the WBHD index. Here's an example from Dr. Eli's study in 2007. And here, looking up to the top right, if you would. So these are elite men and women, and this is a percent off course record time, and looking at quartiles of wet bulb globe temperature index, and this is across a number of marathons across these different cities, and a huge set of data. And for the men, you could see the percent off course record progressively increased, as did the wet bulb globe temperature index. Again, these are individuals running on flatter courses where there's not such a great temperature variation. And for the women, a similar trend was evident, although I believe for the third and fourth quartiles for these individuals, the results were not significant. And when you look at a bigger group, and I believe this is about 300 runners, as the marathon time increases, and this is the performance decrement for 25, 20, and 15, and 10 for wet bulb globe temperature. So again, we're looking at mountain ultramarathon runners, and so we've gone ahead to study a group of runners in a local mountain ultramarathon race in Vancouver. And there we have looked at runners for the past 3 of the past 4 years and studied them, looking at a number of different aspects of their performance. But today what I'd like to focus on here is the effects of meteorological conditions on ultramarathon runner performance, and to examine respiratory heat loss in mountain ultramarathon runners. And that might at first seem like a bit of a lost cause. People's interest in respiratory heat loss has been relatively minor, and hopefully I'll spike your interest in that today when I present the second part of my results. So the Knackering study that we've been doing since 2014, we've looked at cardiorespiratory fitness, climatic conditions, which I'll focus on today, and body temperatures, fluid balance, and won't talk about morphology today. There's another section on autonomic nervous system balance and heart rate variability. The cardiorespiratory fitness, I just want to present a little bit so people can get an impression for the level of fitness and the type of performance, the duration of the performance of these individuals. So this is the start line. The race is always the second Saturday in July. 6 a.m. start, and the field typically is about 200 competitors. We're limited in the number of competitors that can go in the race due to the city, or the district. This is the course, which stretches from Horseshoe Bay in West Vancouver, across Black Mountain, over Hollyburn, Grouse Mountain, through the Lower Seymour Demonstration Forest, and then finishes in Deep Cove. It's a 50-kilometer course, as we'll see here in the next slide. And along the course, well, I'll just go through the profile here. First, this is elevation from the start to the finish of the course, which is 50 kilometers. The runners climb about 1,000 meters in the first 5 kilometers. A huge descent from Hollyburn Mountain down to Cleveland Dam. The second climb is up Grouse Mountain, and the third climb is up Seymour Mountain. And I'm going to be talking about these climb times in our results when we look at the meteorological conditions. This gold star here is giving the location of temperature and humidity monitors, which I'm going to show you in a minute. And for us to study the meteorological conditions, we go along and we place temperature and humidity monitors at strategic locations, 8 locations along the course, so that we are studying the temperatures actually on the course. And some of the other studies have looked at temperature and humidity. It's sometimes locally reported temperature and humidity or some other location, but we're measuring right on the course so that we can look at section-to-section courses, differences in the course for the temperature and humidity and those environmental conditions. Here are some characteristics of the runners. This is from the 2014 study. Typically about 50 years of age, normal height and weight. VO2 is around 60 typically is what we see, and body mass index about 22, so they tend to be thinner. We've got a whole section coming out on the anthropometry of these runners, but I won't present on that today. And for the aerobic capacity tests, we do a incremental exercise test from rest to exhaustion. We do lactate thresholds and Borg. Anaerobic capacity, I won't talk about that again today, but we do the Wingate test, and I'll explain why we do that in a minute. Substrate oxidation and anthropometry are some of the other components of the study. For the runners, we use a GPS watch, heart rate for giving us their heart rate throughout the race. So we're continuously monitoring the athletes. We've got 15 watches that we use, or computers, I guess I should say, and they wear these throughout the race. Some results here to give you an idea of the intensity, and this is why we started measuring the anaerobic capacity of the runners. Heart rates at rest a little before the start is 87, and you can see in the 150s, 140s, but these individuals are a little bit older, and when we look at the percentage maximum, they're anywhere from 85 to 77, so typically above 80% for the majority of a 50-kilometer course, which on average takes about 7.5 hours to finish. The course record's 4.5 hours, but our runners are typically between 5 and 10 hours for the duration of the course. Here, just one of the preliminary results from 2014, and finishing time is a function of VO2 max, about 60% or 55% of the variance explained by that. And when we look at the multiple regression, stepwise linear regression, VO2 enters into the model, as does mass-adjusted VO2 using analysis of covariance and body fat. So the typical predictors of performance that others have already reported on. So we're looking at individuals that are well fit, and their aerobic capacity is determined performance. But what I want to talk about today then is our climatic conditions. And so these are the remote sensors that I put along the course, usually up there the night before or running around a day or two before. They record temperature and humidity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and get up to months of data on them. And they're positioned at those locations that I've already identified. This is the 2014 race, which was the warmer year that we had. It's not extremely warm, but this is wet bulb globe temperature as a function of course distance along the bottom x-axis, but also along the top x-axis is completion time. And so what we did was took an average runner who would finish in a little over 7 hours to give a typical profile of temperatures that they encounter. So we can see at the start things are quite cool, and they're in the green flag zone, and then they're moving up towards the end of the course. So the first line is the WBGT mean, and the other is the WBGT peak. So in this case, the individuals are sitting towards the moderate to high temperatures on the WBGT index and at a risk for overheating. So that provides a stress that we feel that is influencing their ability to perform, as will be evident in a minute. So here is our first set of results. These are mean climb times, and the 3 climb times that I pointed out, which were on Black Mountain, Gross Mountain, and Seymour Mountain, are given here as a function of their mean time to make those 3 climbs. And this is the finishing time for the race as a function of the dry bulb temperature. And at our first look at the results, we were pretty excited to see an R-squared of 0.92, and for the finishing climb time, and then an R-squared of 0.82 for the climb time, and also some significant correlations, not quite as high for the mean vapor pressure. So rather than use relative humidity, which is a percentage of the max capacity of the air to hold vapor, we use the vapor pressure, which is the value that needs to be used. The first point that has come out, and as I pointed out in the earlier slides, individuals that get to the top of the hill first generally are the fittest. And so we need to take out our aerobic fitness from the individuals. Now, this is I'll spend a few seconds here just describing this, because some of the previous studies that have reported on temperature and performance, they're longer races where people are running right through the night. So when you're looking at how temperature and humidity affect performance, it's very important to understand the duration of the race and over what part of the day that the race was completed. Because if an individual, and as Dr. Hoffman's pointed out in the Western States 100, the faster individuals are running longer in the heat than are the slower individuals, and they end up spending a greater portion of the time at night when the temperatures drop quickly. So our race is finished within 10 hours, within a single day, and typically the temperature progresses and gets higher, not progresses, but gets higher over the day. So that's a qualifier for these results. So when we take out the effect of fitness using analysis of covariance, here we have mean finishing climb time less the impact of aerobic capacity, and the same for finishing time. We still get a significant correlation, not quite as high, R squared of 0.6 and R squared of 0.53. The humidity values didn't come out significantly, or I should say the vapor pressure values, but indeed individuals that are at the back of the pack running in these conditions for this duration race are at a point where they're being defeated by Mother Nature, if you like, or Mother Nature's making it more difficult for them as they're competing in warmer conditions, and that's impairing their performance. So the second part of my talk I'm going to talk about is on fluid balance, and this is just a textbook figure to remind people food, liquids, and metabolic water production are sources of water for the body. And output, we know the kidneys, the skin, sweating, and insensible, sensible heat loss, as well as the lungs, and this is where I want to focus on respiratory heat loss, and the feces are all sources of water loss. And I don't want to discuss these values, and that's a whole different story, but when we look at ventilation, a long time ago we looked at exercise as well as hyperthermia, putting somebody in a hot tub, and when we look at ventilation as a function of their core temperatures, we see these thresholds after which there's a proportional increase in ventilation, and I've coined this the human panting response. And we see that not only during hyperthermia induced passively where their metabolic rate isn't changing, but also during exercise. This is an incremental exercise test from rest to exhaustion, ventilator equivalent for oxygen and carbon dioxide. These are just single individuals. This is an N of 6, but we see that same relationship with the threshold and a proportional increase in ventilation. So I was on a student's a colleague in Eugene, Oregon, and they were studying patent-formal valley in individuals that have a right to left shunt in their heart. And it was a bit of a napkin study. I said, hey, plot VEVO2 against esophageal temperature and tell me what you get. So just a reminder, so the patent-formal valley, there's a normal heart to the left, and then when you have a right to left shunt, it bypasses the respiratory circulation or the pulmonary circulation, and consequently the heat loss that goes along with that. So this was the plot that came back on the napkin. This is now published in Journal of Physiology, London. And esophageal temperature, this is incremental test from rest to exhaustion for patent-formal valley and no formal valley. They sit about 0.4 degrees higher at rest or during any stage of exercise, as well as their maximum. This is not connected because they had different maximal points, so it wasn't a continuous curve. So what we're doing now, and what I'm interested in because I'm interested in respiratory physiology and ultramarathon performance, is we're looking at respiratory heat loss in individuals, and we're making some inroads on that. So here to get their core temperature, which we need to get a full understanding of the respiratory heat loss, and as well we're looking at core temperature and performance. We use a core temperature pill. This is a company body cap from just outside of Paris, and as they informed me after the first year that we tried to use their product, we were their first client. But nevertheless, we had a rough first year, but the second and third years were great. What's really nice about these pills is they can record continuously for up to 16 hours. That's a little difficult when somebody's getting up at 6 in the morning to get them to swallow the pill at 4, and they want to maybe still be sleeping. That can become challenging, but they have onboard memory, and you can wirelessly download the data afterwards, so they don't have to carry anything with them, which is, for anyone that's a competitor in a race, keeping things light is a major advantage. So this is the results. We have an N of 8 here for the core temperature pills. Just to give you an idea, they're running about 38.5 degrees. The mean finishing time with this group was 7:20 roughly, and those are their max and min temperatures. When you look at respiratory heat loss, you can divide it into convective and evaporative. This is the convective heat loss. Interestingly, they expressed their results, this study from way back in the 70s in STP, but 3 curves for different body temperatures, 38.5, 37.8, and 37 at 30, 20, and 10 ambient temperatures. Nice linear relationships, but indeed body temperature is a determinant of convective respiratory heat loss. When you look at the evaporative, though, the body temperature is no longer important. Minute ventilation is or evaporative heat loss and minute ventilation are directly proportional. And the equation here, as was given in the last slide, gives you your index of evaporative heat loss. So my contention is these individuals with patent form ovale, and perhaps many of us, and the incidence of patent form ovale is upwards of greater than 30%, as reported by Dr. Levering. And so I'm curious and excited to find out how respiratory heat loss is influencing individuals. Here, these are the equations we used for estimating convective evaporative heat loss. And we need a VO2, which we work backwards, metabolic rate and VO2, which we work backwards from the de Weir equation to come up with our relationships between heart rate and VO2 during the race, and we come up with an estimate of metabolic rate. And inspiratory temperatures we can get from our monitors that are placed along the course. And with that, we end up with our convective evaporative heat loss. And then Fanger's equation for respiratory heat loss is given here. Along the course, we have dry bulb temperatures at our different locations from the start right to the finish. This wasn't a particularly hot year. Our values were anywhere from 15 to the upper 20s at the finish. Along with those dry bulb temperatures, our relative humidity given along the course, and quite a humid year, so stressful in the sense that the evaporative heat loss in these individuals is being restricted. When I look at the loss in weight on average of our individuals, huge variation, but about a kilogram, and indeed metabolic water production, their drinking, that's another big question, but what was interesting for us was when we look at loss of water due to ventilation, we're looking at a significant fraction of that total body water loss over 7 hours, on average about 7.5 hours. When I divide that into the different components to look at the respiratory heat loss in watts as a function for the convective, evaporative, and total, that gives you the values that correspond to these individuals that, and this is an N of 6, that are finishing the race in about 7 hours and 20 minutes. So in conclusion then, after controlling for aerobic capacity, dry bulb temperature is negatively associated with climbing and finishing times in a mountain ultramarathon. And respiratory heat loss in mountain ultramarathons makes a substantive contribution to fluid loss. I want to point out something that these studies take a lot of people. And the majority of the students that helped out were volunteers. I think we had, on the second 2 years, of graduate students. But on race day, we're numbering somewhere between 17 and 20 individuals at all points along the course. And I've given you just a very small amount of what we're doing. We're really excited about this area, and lots of opportunities here. We've, in the lab where we can do our control studies, we're just I've completed a new climatic chamber where we're going minus 65 to plus 85 degrees Celsius. We've got room for heat acclimation studies now, and lots of opportunities there. So thanks very much, and there's a little bit of time for questions.
Thanks, Matt. Great talk, and lots of work on that study. So if you go back about 2 or 3 slides,
sure,
where you had the water loss, just so I get the number. Yeah, okay. So the total body weight loss primarily due to water is about the same as what you've lost through water and ventilation. So
a little bit less for ventilation from these equations.
Yeah. So you that would assume that then there's lots of sweating going on, especially in a humid environment, and they're drinking. So do I have this right, that kind of canceled each other out? They drank as much as they sweat, and is that just fortuitous or what?
Yeah, well, I mean, fluid balance is a challenging topic. Mm-hmm. We've got metabolic water production. We have individuals drinking varied amounts. during the race. We have individuals varying sweating varied amounts. So we know that sweating can go up anywhere 1.5 liters, 2 liters an hour in some individuals. And the one case, I believe it was the first or second year, we had an individual who lost 4.5 kilograms and, into the medical tent. And so I guess my take home on the respiratory heat loss is I'm not super confident on these equations. And especially after looking at the individuals, the patent-formal valley, and seeing their core temperatures are sitting at almost 0.5 degree higher than the other individuals without a patent-formal valley. My feeling is we need to relook at the respiratory heat loss equations and take a close look at the studies in the past that have given us these estimates. So these are all estimates based on the equations that are in the existing literature, and I think that's where we need to go with this, is to take a close look in control conditions in the lab. We've got the environment to do it now with the climatic chamber and look at respiratory heat loss. But I think perhaps Marty will be talking a little bit about fluid balance and weight loss, not so much more on recovery, but he's done a... Okay, but I mean, there's extensive literature on the fluid loss, but I haven't seen too much yet, if anything, on respiratory heat loss over these durations, and that's maybe where it'll show up more in the longer duration races, where you do have individuals breathing at very high rates for extended periods. Other questions? Great. So if I could have the next slide for Dr. Hoffman. So Dr. Hoffman's here from California, where he's at UC Davis in Sacramento at the VA Medical Center. And a great initiative that has happened in the last couple of years is the Ultra Sports Science Foundation that they've started up. They've had conferences for the last 2 years? 4 years, excuse me. The last 2 in Chamonix and this year in Denver. And he's going to be talking to us today on recovery from ultra-endurance competitions.